All right, today we pick up with Russia, reform and reaction. The Russian people eventually want to get freedom from autocratic rule, which is where the ruler has complete say and can make every decision no matter what. And secondly, they wanted freedom from economic backwardness. We want to see a building of their economy and industry. And the third is freedom from social injustice, that they want their lives just to be more respected for their rights and that kind of stuff. So Russia in the 1800s, it is the largest country, the most populous country, and it is a world power purely because of the size of its army. It is a multinational country with many different influences and cultures within their country. And it has a lot of natural resources. And so this makes it very much a global interest and very much a global influence in the rest of the world. However, it has some obstacles that keep it from becoming really truly great. Its social structure is part of that. The nobles were very much a dominant power in Russia, and the middle class is very small. The serfs make up the majority of the Russians, and the Russians had kept the feudal system far longer than any other European nation. Serfs were done away with after the Renaissance in most of Europe. Russia, however, has kept it up through the 1800s. And so the serfs make up the majority of the Russians. They're your servants and peasants and artisans and soldiers. The second thing that keeps it from being really successful is its industry. The serfs do the work and the masters take the pay. So there's really no incentive to do well or to make things better or to make new things or create new things. And so those two things are going to be obstacles that Russia is going to have to overcome in order to make itself into a true world power, not just a world power because of its military. So in 1801, we have Alexander I, and in the beginning of his rule, he's going to ease up on the censorship and he's going to promote education. But as time goes on, later on in his rule, he begins to suppress the liberals and the nationalists because they kept questioning him. And he dies in 1825. His son will take over after him, although it's somewhat of a little bit of a problem because a group of army officers are going to demand a constitution rather than just another new czar. And so it's called the Decembrist Revolt, and this group of army officers demand a constitution from the new czar, which is Nicholas I. Nicholas I, however, is going to suppress this rebellion and several other rebellions as well. He doesn't want to be questioned. He sends out spies to hunt down critics of him. He bans books, certain books, political books. Anyone who is judged a liberal or a revolutionary who wants really big changes really fast, he is going to send to an asylum, sent to a mental hospital. They're judged insane. And if he doesn't do that, then he exiles them to Siberia. Now, neither location is somewhere you want to be. Mental hospitals in the 1800s were not very kind to you at all. They were subjected to electroshock therapy, all kinds of medical experiments to figure out what's wrong with you kind of thing. And going to Siberia is no picnic either. Nicholas I will be the one who brings about the three pillars of Russian absolutism. That these are things that cannot be questioned. The first is orthodoxy, and the Russian orthodoxy of the ties between the church and the government. This is something that shouldn't be questioned or challenged. The second is autocracy, and autocracy is the absolute power of the government. Again, something that shouldn't be questioned or challenged. And the third is nationalism, and there was this huge respect for the traditions of Russia, but along with that comes a suppression of non-Russian groups that aren't Russian, and if you don't speak Russian and if you aren't Russian, you're going to be persecuted to some extent. After Nicholas I, we get Alexander II, and he becomes a kind of a war hero in the Crimean War, and this is between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire gets a little bit of help from Great Britain and France, but Russia is going to be defeated, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they just haven't kept up with the rest of the world in terms of industry. They are not able to produce the same amount of weapons and have the same kind of resources or communication or even road systems that will help support a war. The reaction because of the loss of the Crimean War is that there's a huge demand for change, especially among the liberals and the students who were doing, and the student population was hit pretty hard because they were doing a lot of the fighting. And so in 1861, Russia will have an emancipation or freeing of the serfs. They will no longer be tied to the land. Now there's some problems and benefits with this. Serfs are going to buy land, and that's the idea, that they would buy land and become parts of the community. But most of them are too poor, and if they did get some money together to buy land, their lots were very small, so they could really only raise enough food for themselves and not really have anything that they could take to market. And so as a result, many of these serfs are going to move to the cities because that's, first off, where there's more reforms and more freedom, but the idea was that there was more jobs there. Now, the problem is that a lot of them move to the cities, and you're going to see a lot of overcrowding and not as many jobs as they thought were going to be there. The government will have to reform in order to accommodate the new freed serfs. The Zemstvos are elected assemblies that will be responsible for road repair and schools and agriculture. But we'll see some other changes as well, like the trial by jury will be suddenly a thing that they can have, that it's a right that's entitled to people. And the soldier's term of service is going to be reduced from 25 years to 15 years. So when you signed up for the military, you only had to serve for 15 years instead of 25 years. Now, even with these small reforms, there is a failure to satisfy especially the educated men and women who wanted more. They knew what was out there, they knew what was in Western Europe, and they knew what was going on in America, and they were not happy that Russia was not keeping up. And so they begin a go to the people movement. They go to the peasants. But the peasants don't want change. They're okay with things the way they are. That's the way that it's always been. They know how to deal with this. If things change, they wouldn't know where their place was and how to behave, how to react. And so the peasants often turn them in to the government officials. The People's Will be a group that is created out of this, and it's basically a group of terrorists. And they have a plot to kill the Tsar, to get rid of him. And so in 1881, they make an attempt on Tsar Alexander II. And they place 2 car bombs. And one of the car bombs goes off and it kills his guards. And the other one goes off and it kills Alexander. So no more Tsar. So his son, Alexander III, is going to come in, and he is not happy. His father was assassinated, and so he is going to crack down on the people. It's a very harsh repression of the people, lots of censorship, secret police. He's going to exile people who criticize him, and he brings in a policy called Russification. Basically, he's going to suppress the cultures of non-Russian people, that there's only one language that will be spoken in Russia, and that's Russian. There's only one church that will be followed in Russia, and that is the Russian Orthodox Church. And unfortunately, this policy of Russification is going to target people like the Poles, Polish people who are living there, Ukrainians, the Finns, Armenians, Muslims, and Jews that are living within the Russian territory. Now, Russia had a very large Jewish population. Most of them were located in the territories of Poland and the Ukraine, which at this point were part of the Russian territory. But the major part of their persecution is going to increase with Alexander III and his policy of Russification. He's going to limit the number of Jews who were allowed to study in the universities and who were allowed to practice professions like doctors and lawyers and teachers. They could only live in restricted areas that will be called ghettos. And he encouraged mob attacks or pogroms. These are like little beatings. And he would send in police into a village, and they would beat up the Jews, creating damage. Many Jews are going to leave Russia because of this persecution, and they become refugees. And refugees are just people who flee their homeland for safety. And a lot of them are going to end up going to the U.S. at this time because it's seen as a place where conditions are much better. Now, the Russian industry eventually is going to see some changes. The industrial age will finally arrive in Russia almost 50 years after it arrives in England and Western Europe. Railroads will start going up, factories will start going up, but the problem is that there's still low pay, long hours, and like I said, overcrowding in the cities, and so you're going to see a lot of slum areas develop in the cities. And so we're going to see again a need for change come about.